Welcome to The Spawn Chunks, episode number 319 for Monday, October 14th, 2024. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcast platforms, including on YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Jonny, but the internet knows me as Pixel Riffs, and I'm very thankful to be joined by Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
As am I, thankful because it is the Canadian Thanksgiving weekend. And if you are a Canadian, a happy Thanksgiving to you. And if you're American going, what the crap is going on? Just go with it. It's fine. You have yours, we have ours. It's all good. And we wish you well on yours. If you want to hear more about my Thanksgiving weekend, as well as mannerisms that you might inherit from family members and Star Trek, I don't know how we made that transition, Johnny, but we did. And it was smooth. You can listen to the render distance, which is the extended version of the podcast. You get that every week if you're a patron, and that's patreon.com/thespawnchunks to help us out. And we couldn't be more thankful for the support of our patrons. It's one of the best ways to support the podcast. And we have all kinds of extra stuff for our patrons. We have the Minecraft monthly hangout that's coming up on Saturday, October 26th. And just not this weekend, but the weekend before, we recorded the quarterly hangout. That's where we talk about the download numbers, as well as the YouTube metrics, how the new video version of the show is doing, a few changes coming to Patreon, all that kind of stuff. That is available now on the Patreon page, as well as the Patreon RSS feed. So if you're already subscribed to that RSS feed, it's going to land in your inbox right away on your favorite podcast app. So lots of benefits to being a patron over at patreon.com/thespawnchunks.
This week, we also had the pleasure of appearing on the Impen Skars podcast, appearing in video form over there on YouTube. The audio version of the podcast was also posted earlier in the week, so you can get it on Spotify, download it on Apple Podcasts as well. But the video version is sort of their flagship product and is one of the reasons I think that we decided on our pivot to videos. So we had a really great time talking with Impulse and Skars. Thanks again to them for having us on. We kind of did our podcasters chatting about podcasting episode with them, which is always a delight. Talked about how we developed the show and the way the workflow happens behind the scenes. So if you're interested in some of the stuff, even the stuff that we talk about behind the scenes with our patrons on those quarterly hangouts, getting aired in front of people and discussed with some other professionals in the business, you can find that at Impen Skars podcast on YouTube. We'll have links to that in our show notes this week as well, so you guys can go and find that. We also talked a little bit of Minecraft, because why wouldn't we? Skars had a fun challenge for us in terms of figuring out where certain sound effects came from, so we brought a little bit of the Spawn Chunks to the Impen Skars podcast this week. So that's episode 114 of their show, if you're looking for that. And we've had Impulse on the show before. I'm sure Skars will make his way onto the show at some stage, and maybe we'll return the favor and have him do an Impen Skars podcast segment on our show for once.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the Monkey Dance Skiz segment on the next episode of the Spawn Chunks. Yeah.
We'll manage it. So what's new in your life this week, Joel? What's new in gaming? Because I know it's not always been Minecraft for you this week.
It has not always been Minecraft this week. I spent the week in Satisfactory. We had a really interesting conversation actually on the Sigil Cafe this weekend, where we touched on some Minecraft and some gaming. And because I have been playing Satisfactory, I talked about that as well. And talking about how good it is to take a break sometimes from the games that you play all the time, especially when those games happen to be part of your job. And so I've been focusing again on Satisfactory this week. And it's one of those things that I will be now kind of dialing back a bit. There's a stage in Minecraft that kind of reflects this, but also in Satisfactory when you reach a certain, I guess, point in phase 3 of the tech progression where the game really opens up, but then it also slows down in terms of like, okay, now I need a power plant that's going to be like quintuple the size of what I have now, and that's going to take several hours, like 15 hours to design and build. So you can't just like pop down another biomass burner or pop down another coal plant and keep on playing for another 6 hours because now you have enough power. You really kind of reach a bottleneck. You have to produce 100 adaptive control units, which are very complicated pieces, and you need like 4 factories just to make those. So you're like, okay, it all starts to slow down. So I'm reaching that point now where on this new save, like, do I want to continue to invest time into this new save? Do I want to try and go back to my Devastator save that I've been playing for 5 years and continue with that? There is a website online that allows me to edit save files. So like I could combine them. Like I could take the biome that I'm in now, I've not done anything in the Devastator save. So I could take the biome I am in now and drop it into the Devastator save and combine the 2 saves. I don't know in my head yet if I consider that, I want to say air quotes, cheating, like it just, it's, sometimes you kind of want to just build everything in one go. I mean, it's all been manpower. Like there's no mods. I've not done anything in a fast way. There's no copy paste or creative mode or anything like that. So I've just been thinking about like where do I really want to put the time investment? Because just like everything else, when I've done modded series in Minecraft, when I've done Skyblock series in Minecraft, there's a certain point in that series where I think this is just time I'm playing Minecraft that I'm not working on the Citadel, that I'm not working
Hmm.
on Westhill and getting that closer to finish, you know? And I think the same way about this stage in Satisfactory. Although it has made me think like maybe when I return to Minecraft, because my brain is just so focused on the technical right now in Satisfactory, there are some creative bits in it. But for me at this stage, it's a lot of like looking forward to like trains and throughput and load balancing and mining this and converting it to that. And I thought maybe I would take the opportunity to try maybe a Sky Factory or another Skyblock map, or maybe try the create mod in Minecraft, which I've been wanting to try and just haven't had an excuse. Again, for the same reason, it was pulling me away from Westhill and the other projects that I had. But if the technical brain that I'm kind of exercising right now in Satisfactory is kind of on the forefront, like if that's leading the charge, then maybe it's a good opportunity to check out some of the more technical things in Minecraft. And I know that you've played one. I want to say it was Sky Factory 3. I just
Yeah.
remember it being very technical and it was very
Hmm.
focused on like collecting stuff and combining stuff and making new stuff. And it wasn't so much about the building. I think you obviously would make it about building at some point, but I feel like a lot of it was focused on like a tech tree, and there was some sort of quest book that was getting you through to kind of
Yeah.
figure out what you were going to do next. So I was wondering if you had any recommendations for like a more technical mod pack that I might be able to explore.
Yeah, I mean, if the Sky Factory stuff appeals to you, it's very kind of it's Skyblock, but it's an even grindier version of Skyblock because it really gives you the opportunity to make absolutely everything, and it gives you the opportunity to do that several different ways. So the way I ended up going through, while it was technical and while it required some of the grindy kind of, you've got to make solar panels and then combine them with a bunch of extra crafting ingredients to make like a better solar panel and get more power that way. And there are nuclear reactors and all kinds of like fantasy power generation mechanics. I was also going through that with the purpose of putting together incubators for plants, and the plants would grow me certain types of essence that could be crafted into different blocks, and like all that kind of stuff goes into it. And there are, I think, like 4 or 5 different ways of acquiring resources, and you just kind of pick whichever one suits you. So even though it's got a narrow kind of bottlenecked start, there's a lot of flexibility in it later. But I don't know what the latest version of Sky Factory is. Like, I played Sky Factory 3 when Sky Factory 4 was in development, and that was probably at least 5 years ago now. Like, I remember making that ages ago, back when my office was in the other room in this house, and it's been in here for a while. So, yeah, I honestly don't know what the latest version of that is. Create Mod has had something of a pretty huge following lately. There's some people who've done really well on YouTube out of Create Mod, and so it's clearly got a heck of a groundswell behind it. And that I think will be closer to the experience of something like Satisfactory, in that you've got a
Hmm.
standard, like a default Minecraft world. If like you're just loading in Create Mod and a few other bits and pieces to support it, I think you might have an easier time just focusing on that mod and everything it can do. Because having had a minimal amount of time to play around with it, it was on the New Life server, which I only ever played for like the duration of one YouTube episode, and then I ended up getting sidetracked by other stuff and PC troubles and everything. But people were playing with Create Mod in that and making things like functional windmills that could turn, like had the 360-degree rotation instead of, being static or operated by pistons and being all herky-jerky. There were like really interesting farming mechanisms and stuff. And obviously, if you want to get into actual factory building, it's got the conveyor belts. It's got all of the kind of moving items around stuff that I think Satisfactory does pretty well from the get-go. So at least some of the language of that will feel familiar to you if you want to get into it. Obviously, yeah, it's going to feel very different to vanilla Minecraft, but maybe you can draw that line a little bit and make it a solo create playthrough and see how you get on with it before deciding to head back into vanilla.
Yeah, I think I might try Create because I do have a Skyblock world that I started a while ago, and I don't remember exactly what it was. I feel like I was having some technical issues with a new release of Minecraft, like I was having some screen stutters, or it was unplayable for me for whatever reason. And so it's like, well, I'll just try Skyblock as a way to just kind of fill the time and still play Minecraft. But Create Mod is something I've watched. I've watched Tango play it. I think I've seen a couple of other people play it as well, and that definitely appeals. Like that to me is kind of more what I'd be looking for, I think. And I like the idea of experiencing that movement in Minecraft, because that's something I really like about Satisfactory is that there's a lot of movement happening all the time. And it's kind of like, it informs you that your factories are working, but it also just kind of gives life to the world. Something that I do find challenging about Minecraft is that the push to suspend your disbelief is also pushed by your imagination of the boat moving down the river with no one in it. The static builds that you make, in the sky, like an airplane or something like that doesn't move, that kind of thing. So having that movement available for things like windmills or other projects would be really, really cool. So yeah, I'll have to look into that closely. Will Run for Fun in our live chat says that Sky Factory 5 is in playtesting now. And I looked it up quickly. Sky Factory 4 is currently what is available. So what you were looking at as in beta or playtesting back then is now the main. It sounds like the main Sky Factory for people that are interested in that. So I might look at both. I know who knows. I do want to work Minecraft back into my rotation this week. That's part of the plan anyway. And so definitely we'll be looking at Create Mod. I'll have to figure out what other mods might be needed to support it, just because I do find sometimes modded Minecraft chugs my system a bit. However, that's when I'm playing like all of Fabric 5 or some nonsense that's this massive mod pack with all kinds of things in it that I may or may not use. If I'm just focusing on Create Mod and just working through that, then that might be a little bit lighter as far as an experience goes.
Yeah, likewise, Skyblock is a little bit less resource intensive because you don't have all of the terrain and stuff going on around you. So, I think either of those could be a good avenue back into it, even if the system requirements are a bit of a concern. Well, speaking of getting things back into rotation, I have not only been getting Minecraft Survival Guide back into rotation, I have been building things which are designed to look like they rotate, because I've started exploring wind charger launchers. And how to decorate them. So wind charges are something that obviously I've managed to farm already. I've got a couple of breeze spawners that I'm farming from a trial chamber, and I wanted to explore wind power and air travel and flight in this new Windy City project that is going to take shape in this area that I'd been landscaping for the last little while before my brief break into fantasy Minecraft. And since then, obviously, because I took a bit of a break and came back, a lot of people have started to figure out the best ways of using wind charges, and I've been watching Hermitcraft, where Cubfan135 has figured out this way of using a composter to allow wind charges to burst underneath the player without the block down there obstructing any of the impact zone, because they'll travel through the wall of a composter if a dispenser is facing into it, but they'll impact on the inside wall of the composter and still give that kind of burst of energy, that lift that players need. So you can position a composter with a pressure plate on top and a couple of dispensers around the base of it, and that will give the player enough lift to, if you have 4 dispensers, it bursts you up like 50 blocks. So one dispenser will get you maybe 7 or 8 blocks of lift with a single wind charge. 2 charges gets you 15 blocks, and 15 blocks is about the height of some of the cliffs that I've been building in this area that I've been landscaping. So I figured, okay, to get around the city, you have little wind charger, almost jump pads that launch you from one section to another. Instead of mechanics like slime block launchers or relying on elytra and fireworks to get around, I wanted the city to be walkable but still vertical and dynamic. And so I've been playing around a little bit with that. It turns out the way Cubfan does it, with 8 wind charges in dispensers, because there are there's a plus shape of 4 next to the composter, and there's a plus shape of 4 around the player, and you just jump in, hit a pressure plate in the center. That launches you into the sky, I think about 150 blocks. Wow. And so, that's your elytra launcher. That's okay, I want to leave now. You start a glide pretty much instantly. And I figured I would start to decorate these to be in the shapes of giant fans, because it makes sense, especially having played Sonic the Hedgehog games from back in the day, where there'd be sections where your character gets lifted up on a fan and there's these air currents really obviously blowing you around. Even I think Minecraft Dungeons has a DLC area like that, where you're on the Howling Peaks and you have wind updrafts that are carrying you around and enemies that use the wind to stagger you and kind of put you off balance. And so I decided, let's start theming some of this around wind and giant fans and more industrial looking stuff being part of the aesthetic that I really want to build with. So In the floor, I have a couple of smaller ones for just like 2 or 3 wind charges at a time where you can walk over it, and it looks like it's got a few fan blades. They're just made out of quartz stairs or something like that around the outside. And cover that over with copper grates. It both looks really good because the fan has a case on it so that you couldn't like trip and fall into the fan blade or something like that. But it also has this aesthetic. If you look down, with the wind charge impact having those kind of spiraling particles, it actually does look like it's rotating. It looks like there's this flurry of activity under there if you're looking down at it. And you're probably looking down at your feet because you're also concerned about where you're landing. So you kind of get a bit of animation in there as well. And then the larger version, if I wanted to, in this case, I have a big sort of city plaza style area marked out that I haven't really built much of yet, but I built the giant fan in the ground. And it's a 9x9 square with some massive fan blades in it. And that's the one that pushes you up like 30 blocks or so, because the plan is that you step onto that and you land on the balcony of like a station concourse, and that's how you get up to the monorail that I'd already designed to get people fast traveling around the area and then into the nether from there. So I'm starting to work on these little transport connections with wind charges as a focus because they're new and they're interesting, and I wanted to try and play around with them a bit more. So the main thing that remains to be seen is where I'm getting all of these wind charges from and how this impacts where I want to build everything in this area, where it's most optimal to place these wind charge launchers relative to some of the buildings I want to make. But so far, I'm honestly having a lot of fun with them. They're about as fun to play around with as like slime block launchers and stuff are once you really get into them.
It's almost like you need an umbrella in Minecraft. You know, you walk up to the wind charge, you just open up the umbrella, and poof, off you go. Yeah, it's a really neat idea. It's a really cool way of using like that parallax effect too, of layering blocks, like blocks that have holes in them, and transparency that you can then walk over and have it kind of flicker. It's like those old, I can't remember what they were called, unfortunately, but in animation school and in art school when I was a really young kid, you would draw a sequence of images on a strip of about 12 or 24 images. And then if you put it in a drum with slots in it and you spun it, it would look like a motion picture, right? Because it would be
I think
tracking
it's
around.
called a zoetrope or something like that. It's
I think you're right.
The kind of thing that was used to demonstrate like the running horse back in the day as like one of the first kind of like motion picture prototypes almost. Yeah. So absolutely something like that. Kind of getting a few frames, like a little flicker of movement, can really sell the animation of something, even if it looks static the rest of the time.
And it's such a simple thing to add to Minecraft, but it adds so much to the experience, and especially with traversal. Like in the modern city on the Citadel, we've built bubble columns and bubble elevators into like the quote unquote technology of the city. It's like this, it's a modern city for looks, but in this particular universe, they use water to get up and down. We have no idea how anybody is dry in any of the office or apartment buildings, right? But it's so much more fun to do, and it saves so much time. And the slime block elevators and stuff are slow, they're complicated, they take up a lot of space. It was just easier to go with the bubble columns. And I feel like this is a really good solution, and you don't have to build like this confined column around it. Like you could if you wanted to. You could use it as an elevator in an apartment building if you wanted to. But you could also just use it as, like you said, this open square that sends you up onto a balcony. It's just such a neat idea. Like I can totally see this in like a Studio Ghibli film where like that's just the accepted mode of getting around. Like when you need to get to the next floor or the next level of something, you just walk over to the big fan and poof yourself up to the next thing. It's wild. And I don't imagine anybody in your town is going to be wearing dresses or skirts. I imagine
it's pantaloons only is definitely
pantaloons only.
Yeah, but no, I think it's going to be fun to mess around with some of this stuff, and I think it's really interesting how balanced this is with other methods of vertical transport. Like, they all have their upsides and downsides. You talked about bubble columns having to have a column around the outside and like hem in those water blocks, otherwise they spill out everywhere. I think the thing about these is that wind charges are finite, so you have to make sure that there's a way of the thing being refilled, or just guarantee that you're not going to use it frequently enough that you're going to run out of wind charges in all of those dispensers. But it's 9 stacks, so that's about 580 uses, and you end up with, hoppers and barrels and stuff pointing into those in certain designs. Then you can end up with a lot more. It's just how much of the aesthetic of it you sacrifice for functionality. I don't expect I'll be running around here all that much, practically speaking, but I love the idea of being able to explore that way. and it sort of counterpoints slime block launchers where you have to make sure that they're surrounded by immovable blocks, so you have a limited block choice of what you can put near them, and we've got to think about the future of that, whether we end up with movable tile entities and movable containers in future, so you wouldn't be able to put like droppers and other things around a slime block launcher and furnaces. So like thinking ahead, wind charges seem like the functionality is pretty locked in, and I imagine that that's going to work like long term for a while. But I love the freedom of having a platform that you can just step onto and be launched, instead of it being something like a water column that has to be enclosed in a structure.
Oh, totally. And I think it would be a really interesting experiment if you ever invite people to explore the town when it's all finished, and these fans and mode of getting around is in the town and designed and worked into everything, and have people going around without elytra. Like they have to walk and they have to use the fans to get to where they want to explore and look at the city. That would be a really interesting kind of Minecraft experiment in terms of like traversal. And do people find them fun? Do they find them necessary? Do they like, how does that change your brain when you're walking around a build? Like you're looking for like where's the next up fan? You know, like how do I like that looks cool. How do I get up there? There's going to be a fan around here somewhere. Like that kind of like change in the way that you explore an area would be really, really cool.
The other fantastic thing about them is because you're pushed up with a wind charge, even if it's not player thrown, like if it's from a dispenser, you still have the same wind charge effect of you don't take fall damage as long as you don't drop further than the point where you started vertically. So if you're using them just to get up to places, then you're guaranteed no fall damage, which means you can throw yourself 130 blocks into the air, land on a building, or land like back down at street level and suffer no consequences, which is perfect. Like it's so well thought through on the part of the team that I'm really happy that they've done that.
You have to get like a model of the Daily Planet and leap over it in one single bound, right?
Yes, absolutely. Strong enough to do that in Minecraft. Minecraft Steve, the new Superman. Well, we're going to move on to some more Minecraft news, because we have Java Edition pre-release 1 for Minecraft 1.21.2, I believe is the official denomination for it. The Bundles of Bravery drop is what we're talking about. The first pre-release came out October 8th, followed by a second and third. So we'll run down those quickly as we get into the news here. It is now time, the article says, for the first pre-release for Minecraft 1.21.2 Bundles of Bravery drop. Moving into pre-releases means that you won't see any significant changes besides bug fixes and tweaks until the next snapshot cycle. It also means we'll be releasing more frequently than just Wednesdays, so keep an eye out for the next pre-releases. In experimental features, a couple of changes came to the winter drop. The creaking will not activate or freeze around players in creative mode. Creaking summoned from the creaking heart cannot be named with name tags anymore. And a comparator attached to the creaking heart block will output a signal strength dependent on the distance to the connected creaking. A couple of changes came to the non-experimental features as well, including a tweak to Air Bubble UI. There is now an empty state for air bubbles, along with a wobble when the player is drowning. They've added a popping sound when the bubbles pop in the UI to alert the player that they are running out of breath. Technical changes include the datapack version now being 57. This adds a disable player movement check game rule, which can be toggled to remove player movement speed restrictions, similar to a game rule that already existed for Elytra. This also adds the camera overlay field for equipable items, which might add an overlay similar to the pumpkin overlay, following last week's changes which made items equipable to bypass vision-based mob behavior like with Enderman and the creaking. The format of color fields in particle options is now more standardized, making those easier to use across the board. The resource pack version is now 41, which adds texture and sound options for the tweaked Air Bubble UI. Fixed bugs of note in this pre-release: flaming arrows no longer extinguishing when water or powdered snow were placed in their location. That's been fixed, along with bundles not emptying smoothly, creakings spawning with do mob spawning set to false, and the map color for pale oak saplings was incorrect. That's been fixed, along with a handful of other fixes, many of which seem to be related to enchantment glint overlay. A full list of the bug fixes and tweaks can be found in the Minecraft.net changelog that's linked in our show notes. Moving on, we got pre-release 2 for this update on October 10th. A couple more changes came to the winter drop, specifically related to pale hanging moss and moss carpet. So pale hanging moss now only drops when cut with shears or destroyed using a tool with silk touch. Previously it was harvestable by hand. Pale moss carpet is now more efficient to destroy with a sword, and pale moss carpet now plays the correct step sounds when you're walking over it. A whole raft more bug fixes came in with this pre-release, including an old fix to sneaking while falling on slime blocks, inflicting fall damage. Now, this was an old bug which was originally marked works as intended, but was reopened thanks to another bug somebody reported, where jumping when falling onto a slime block no longer cancelled the bounce effect. That's now been officially fixed, so sneaking cancels both your bounce and fall damage when a player falls on a slime block. Breezes jumping on top of honey blocks has been fixed as well, so their jump height will be reduced like it is with other mobs, and jump boost no longer affecting the breezes jump has been fixed too, along with other fixes to throwing an ender pearl through a portal or a gateway, often resulting in the player being placed slightly too low, nether portals sending you back if your ender pearl lands in the portal, and a thrown ender pearl teleport position just being inconsistent. As before, a full list of the bug fixes in this pre-release can be found at the Minecraft.net changelog, linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com. Finally, Java Edition pre-release 3 for 1.21.2 was released on October 11th, 2024. This just brought a tweak to the high contrast resource pack, adding frame and background textures for tooltips and a slot background and highlight texture for the bundle tooltip. A technical change to the resource pack, which adds a texture for the bundle slot background, so that brings it up for people who make resource packs as well. There are only 4 bug fixes in this pre-release, which were passengers dismounting minecarts and boats when converting, projectiles visually falling when shot in a wall with a high tick rate, mobs in their death animations producing the fire extinguishing sound every tick while being in lava while it was raining, and mobs in death animations inside both water and lava producing the fire extinguishing sound every tick. That was all the bugs, and once again you can find the Minecraft.net changelogs for all of these linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
Minecraft Bedrock Edition Preview 1.21.50.20 was released on October 9th, 2024. This preview brings Bedrock's Edition's first look at the Winter Drop. It adds the Pale Garden biome, Pale Oak Tree, Pale Moss Block, Pale Moss Carpet, Pale Hanging Moss, and Pale Oak Wood set. It also adds the Creaking Mob, Creaking Spawn Egg, and Creaking Heart Block. We've covered these features in previous Java changelogs on the show, so we won't recap everything here. Instead, we'd like to focus on the gameplay changes. There is now a warning message when you are prevented from entering an unloaded chunk. The Respiration enchantment now reduces the chance of taking drowning damage. Players can no longer earn achievements on trophies after dying and respawning as a spectator in hardcore mode. Mace damage now scales with distance fallen when it is used by mobs. And most notably, players will keep their inventory after dying on easy and peaceful game modes as Mojang tests ways to adapt Minecraft difficulty levels. The Minecraft.net article includes a link to give your feedback on these changes, and we will of course include the links to that as well as all of the other Minecraft.net articles in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
So we're actually making that our main discussion for today. We've talked difficulty in the past, but I think it hadn't occurred to either of us that they would be interested in making the easy mode easier, or at least like adjusting difficulty in that way. So we wanted to have a bit more of a discussion about that later. So we'll save feedback on that. And for now, let's talk about the first thing that comes up, the Bundles of Bravery pre-releases. I'm assuming, personally, that we're probably going to get a release candidate this week, because that last pre-release only had 4 bug fixes in it, which is usually a sign that they're narrowing things down to a release version. So I'm crossing my fingers, because obviously I really want bundles in the game, but I'm imagining the drop maybe arrives midweek. If not this week, then I think definitely next week, Joel.
Oh, I had my money on October for sure. And yeah. Having read through those bug fixes and stuff before the show, I agree. I think we're closer to mid-October than I think the end of October, which means that the Bundles of Bravery is going to be in everybody's hands sooner than later. Much to, I guess, the joy of the bundle supporters out there. Looking forward to messing with those. And I think that the only thing that could maybe stave that would be more bug fixes. Like, unless there's some crashes or serious things that they have to change, then I think it should be fine to roll forward. The question that I have is someone that runs a modded server. While it's not really modded gameplay, we do have a lot of mods for quality of life and performance issues. I'm curious as to see how quick the modding community for the mods that I use will catch up. And so it might not be right away that I can update to Bundles of Bravery, but that's okay for me. I don't know that there's a lot happening here outside of some of the bug fixes, which I think are cool. There's not a lot to entice me to like really be impatient for access to it. So we'll get it when we get it, and that's okay with me. one of the things that I thought was interesting, which I think you also caught, was some of the changes they've made to the way that the creaking works, and how it's now you can use a comparator to read an output from the creaking heart, depending on how close a creaking is to the creaking heart.
Yeah. Yeah, that's got to be really interesting. From what I understand, the range that the creaking can get away from the creaking heart that spawns it is about 32 blocks. So if you imagine a comparator signal strength is obviously split up into 15, like the redstone signal strength is 15. So every 2 blocks away, maybe it decreases the signal by 1 if it works in like a linear fashion that way. You could have some really interesting control over comparator signal if you were able to control where the creaking went. And I think this is the main thing that I'm still waiting to see, is how much control players are going to have over where creaking spawn and what their like capability to travel is from there, in order for that to be something players can take advantage of mechanically, for whether it's minigames or like just redstone contraptions or other uses. Because if you consider that they're going to despawn every night, right? Like they spawn every night, they despawn every dawn, then it's only going to be viable for half the day. Obviously, you got to make sure that you don't sleep if you want to take advantage of it, but then it's going to spawn in a different location, and you can't make it static in that location. They removed the capability to name tag them because like name tags were just obviously disappearing along with the creaking, and it wouldn't bring the creaking back name tag next time the heart spawned one. And yeah, I'm just kind of curious how players will end up using this. I think it's a very cool mechanic that it exists, though. It's the first time we've really had something that's based on entity proximity to a block being something that you can track with redstone, and that's got a lot of interesting implications. Like if you consider it for mini games where you have to like look away from a creaking and then look back, a kind of like red light, green light kind of system, but with a creaking, like you could maybe track that. You could do like fun minigame ambushes with it, but then, you know, track whether or not the creaking can get to the player and maybe shut off certain ways. Like once the comparative signal drops below a certain point, the creaking is either released or is unable to reach the player, and it's just used as a jump scare. Like there's a lot of different things I can think about using that. I think it's really interesting that they've given a comparator the power to interact with a block that is effectively in itself a hostile mob, or the generator of a hostile mob. That's really fun.
I was thinking as we've been talking about the ways that you might be able to control that, and if we could work out the traversal mechanics of a creaking, you know, if we can put them in a path where they can't step outside of the path, and the path is, as you said, maybe 32 blocks long. Is it a straight line? Is it a spiral of blocks that gradually gets 32 blocks away from the creaking heart? If you are running something in a minigame, I'm thinking right now of Tango's project where he's doing like a cooking game where the players have to kind of like collect items and cook. But if you had to do something like that, where you had to collect things or move things or do things in this game, but in order to have like the door stay open, you had to have the creaking be a certain distance from the heart, and you had to keep it there, which means that you, like in a straight line, you would just kind of like let the creaking follow you until it would get to the end, and then it would just probably stay there until dawn came. But if you had different levels, like this door opened at signal strength 12 and this door opened at signal strength 6, you might have to kite the creaking around like a maze, kind of like those old labyrinth games with like the marbles, where you kind of had like tilt the board and try not to have the marble go down the hole. Like that could be really interesting. What happens if a creaking comes across trapdoors? Like, does it fall in like other mobs? Like, could you drop a creaking to another level? How far is that from the creaking heart? Like, there's a couple of things I could think of that could be really interesting. I don't know what you would do as the game mechanic. Like, I'm not sure what you're doing to win. But the thing that I do find interesting is that when they all despawn at dawn, that's the automatic end of your timer. Like when the creakings are gone and the creaking heart has a signal strength of 0 or whatever the equivalent is, whether it's 15 or 0, depending on how it reads, then that would be like your game just shuts down. Like your game is done. Like all the doors close, like all the boards stop, like whatever it is that you're doing is no longer being tracked. So it's an instant off, you know, when the daylight comes. And I think that's really, really interesting. And it gives you kind of like this immediate, like, finish line, timer over sort of situation. I've never designed a mini game in Minecraft, so I'm not sure what mechanics there could be useful for folks. But the idea of like red light, green light, or even if it was the opposite of like maybe there's a player that is controlling the creaking by manipulating them, by getting them to follow them. And maybe that player isn't participating in the game and that they're trying to win. Maybe their job is to try to keep the other 3 players down below or wherever that happens to be from winning. Like you're controlling the creaking by moving it around. So you're kind of like trying to sabotage everything that's going on in the game. And then the other players down below are trying to win, but they can't tell what you're doing. You're just manipulating the creaking. So the creaking is not operating in the same way that it would normally, right? Like it could be really interesting.
I love the idea of making like a maze kind of thing, and it's effectively like you are using the creaking to remotely play tag with people. Like if they get hit by the creaking, it's over, but you have to control it by like not looking in the direction where you want it to go, or like there's so many fun little ways that could be messed with. But yeah, it all just depends how much control we have over manipulating what the creaking does once it's spawned in. So I'm looking forward to people getting their hands dirty with these things and figuring out what else is possible. It is strange to have a mob that breaks with convention, though, with not being able to name tag it, put it in a boat or a minecart to make it persistent. I think it's quite bold of Mojang to do something like that, even if I think a lot of people will find it frustrating that you can't make it permanent throughout the day. I think it's really fun that they're giving us limitations like that and seeing what players are still able to do with them.
It opens up some precedence, I think, for new things. And I think that it's a really good first effort. Like, I think it's unique, and like the way that it operates makes sense. Like, you're not going into this thinking like this is really strange. Like the fact that it moves at you when you're not looking, that feels like something a monster would do. Like it feels very natural in that way. So it does kind of make me wonder like what other things they could do in the future to have, those kind of controls or those kind of experiences for players. I do want more control over less in Minecraft. Like I would like to be able to name them and move them around or do things with them in that way. I think a lot of other people would too. But I think that having a block that creates the creaking, like the creaking heart, is really the thing that intrigues me, because it's similar to like a spawner that you can move, right? And if that opens up the doors for an actual spawner you can move in the future, or another kind of mob that spawns from something, like maybe there's a flower that creates mobs, I think that could be an interesting dynamic. Like how does that affect? Maybe it's a passive mob? Like maybe it's not an aggressive mob you have to fight. Like maybe it's a flower that's makes some sort of butterflies or bugs or something, and like maybe you want them in your garden, but like, do you want both? Or do you have to hide the flower and then just get the butterflies? Like there's a bunch of stuff that I think could be very interesting in terms of how the player experiences the world based on what blocks are affecting the world. I think that's the thing, is that so far there's not very many blocks in Minecraft that actually have like an area of effect that influence like around it, compared to blocks that just affect the way that the block looks. And the only way that it affects the area is if you start to put a lot of them around, and that affects the player experience. The only thing I can think of off the top of my head is like a beehive. So like the beehive really affects the environment when it's full of bees, because then there's movement, it changes status, like you can get stuff from it. It's a whole dynamic interaction between the beehive and the environment when there's bees in it. Compared to when it's just a static block and it's just used like any other building block. The creaking heart is, again, a really unique experience where it's affecting the environment around it.
Yeah, and I think it's still going to be kind of fun seeing how people end up using them, whether it's for building or whether it's for a bit more of an interesting dynamic. Here's a pitch for you for making creaking persistent, right? And this is going to be dependent on us being able to farm the creaking heart block. So if we grew it in pale oak trees, whether that's under certain conditions or if they just always had a chance to generate in the same way that bee nests do once you have like flowers around and stuff. What if you had pale oak log, creaking heart block, carved pumpkin, and you could make a persistent creaking sort of the same way that you can with golems, like snow golems or iron golems, right?
Sure.
Like, that would be a way to incorporate them into minigames and stuff and have them be persistent throughout the daytime, still have the same mechanics, but they'd be like the ones that you can spawn in with a spawn egg, where that's given to you in creative mode. You can spawn them that way. They aren't linked to a creaking heart block. Players can damage them. They have half a heart of health and they go down very easy. But there's a way to have them persist through the day-night cycle and be accessible to the player. If that was possible in survival, still involves the Creaking Heart block, so still requires you to be able to grow these things. And I guess that also changes the balance of whether you want to travel to the biome or not. But I think there's maybe some fun to be had there, and maybe some angles that Mojang can consider for making them a bit more accessible to players long term.
Well, one of the things that we've talked about in the last few episodes is the Pale Garden biome and whether or not you want to go there. And we have a pretty sizable email this week that I want to get to about that, and it's really interesting. So hold on to your horses here. If you would like to email the show, it is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Try to keep your emails short and concise. It does help them get on the show. However, when you have such an interesting point to make, we do make exceptions. This email is from Malcazar. It's really difficult to not say Malcazar, and like it's just such a cool name, And the subject line is Malcazar, the landscape architect. How is that like? Not the landscape architect of doom, or
yeah, that sounds like a Dark Souls boss from another,
right?
From a game when Dark Souls is a lot more about interior design or something.
Yeah, fantastic username. And they say, "Hello, Jonny and Joel. I'm a landscape architect in my daily life, and in Minecraft, I also enjoy creating landscapes. So I thought the two of you might be interested in what someone who knows something about both landscape architecture and Minecraft might want to see in future Minecraft drops. First off, what I would like to see in the upcoming Pale Garden biome. Personally, I really like the concept of a creepy forest, but I don't think it does a lot of justice to the name Pale Garden. I would love to see some more unique flowers in this biome that fit the creepy aesthetic. Some flowers that fit with this theme are a ghost plant, a completely white succulent, which looks like small white flowers. Shame plant, a very interesting plant which is known for shriveling up when touched or when it's dark. It could really fit in with the creepy aesthetic, as when it goes through the plant's changes, they all close when it's getting dark and the creaking appears. Garlic, the garlic has a flower that looks a lot like a small white allium. Garlics could also be interesting as a potion for a cooking ingredient. Pansies, a very common garden plant in a lot of different colors. The Halloween pansy, for instance, is black with an orange center, something that mimics how the creaking looks. A corpse flower is a very tall jungle plant. It would be interesting if you take a sniffer into the Pale Garden biome, it could dig up the seeds that grow this flower. The flower smells like a corpse, which could be used to attract flies or other insects to pollinate. Perhaps in game, this could attract fireflies. The jack-o'-lantern mushroom is an orange mushroom that glows at night. Granted, when it glows, it grows green, but with some Minecraft logic, you could change it to glow orange. Bioluminescent mushrooms are something the community has been asking for a long time. White pumpkins, these could be similar to regular pumpkins, and when crafted into jack-o'-lanterns, they could perhaps have a different face than the orange version. Sometimes maybe like a skeleton face or even a creaking face would be cool. The white ash tree, I love the new wood type, but I don't like that it's just a retextured dark oak tree. A different shape and different name could help with differentiating it from the roofed forest biome. Would love to hear your thoughts on this. I was planning a lot of other plants to include, but this email is already quite long. Best, Malcazar died smelling the corpse flower. And we will have images that Malcazar has sent in, and I will post them in our live chat. I'll put them on the website as well at thespawnchunks.com, and I'll make sure to label each image so you know which is which. But some of them are super, super cool. What do you think, Jonny?
Yeah, I mean, these are some really great additions. Great to have email from somebody with expertise, of course. And yeah, some of these I think would make a really compelling addition to not just the flora of the biome itself and the fact that it needs a little bit more life, but also the color palette they're already working with in that desaturated vibe that the Pale Garden already has. Just looking at the Halloween pansies and the ghost plants, I think those would be perfect. I like the notion of white pumpkins as well, which are something that exists in real life. There are plenty of different colored varieties of pumpkins, and I think those could be a really interesting addition. Even if that's just like biome tint for existing pumpkins, that would be kind of fun. Opening up to biome tint obviously changes the way we would think about bringing pumpkins around the world, but if there was a new block and suddenly Pale Gardens are a guaranteed destination for pumpkin blocks, that's not only an interesting way of getting hold of them in survival. That's also a fun change for game modes like Minecraft Bingo that I love, where sometimes tracking down a pumpkin, even though they should be able to spawn in every biome, is just one of the last things you find because you're looking everywhere for them and you never find a pumpkin patch. So yeah, like, I think this does seem to be a common community sentiment, is that Pale Garden feels like a name that should have more flora in there. There should be a little bit more variety in the biome. Hopefully Mojang is taking that feedback on board, because it seems to be one of the more common requests, and I can see why they didn't just want to call it like a pale forest or just name it after the tree, because it doesn't really give that feeling of something being different about this biome. It just feels like, hey, another forest to add to the game. We've got so many forests already. So I can see with them naming it that way, they wanted to set it apart a little bit, and Pale Garden has that eerie quality that maybe Pale Forest doesn't, but I still think they need to live up to the name a little bit. So I'm on board with this idea. I think they've given some really excellent suggestions.
I thought it was really cool to hear from a landscape architect as well. And it's funny, like, I never thought about that profession being called a landscape architect. Like, I would have thought it would be like a landscaper or a gardener. Like, I know there's different aspects to it and different specialties, but like a landscape architect was not what I would think of off the top of my head. So it was really cool to hear from someone that obviously has a deep knowledge, and some of them I really feel are bang on. The one that jumps out at me is the corpse plant. And I have seen them before, and I don't remember hearing the details about them, but I've seen them in other either media or maybe like a nature show. I don't know. But what I like so much about it is, like, one, it's creepy. It's weird in that it fits in like the Minecraft kind of like weird plant aesthetic. It's also colorful, but really pale. So it's green and purple, but it's like a really pale, almost white green. And the purple is really desaturated. Like, it's not a rich purple flower. It's almost like it almost looks brown when you look at it. And I think it would go really well in the Pale Garden because of just how odd it is. And I mean, like, the history and how they describe it, the fact that it smells like a corpse to attract bugs, I think is gross and fits like the whole creepy vibe. I don't know whether Minecraft would still call it a corpse flower. Like, they might change it to something a little bit less morbid. It might be, they might change it, but they could still take inspiration from it. You know, like the shape, the size, a too tall flower. Maybe it gives you purple dye. Like, there could be some real functionality added there too, right? Because we have got some other too tall flowers, but they're not as unique and as numerous as the other flowers. And so that could be really, really fun. I also like the mushrooms, obviously, like the orange mushrooms that glow in the dark. I didn't realize, and this is kind of silly, I probably should have, that there were real glow in the dark mushrooms out there. Like, it's not just something that sci-fi made up. You know, like, I have to remind myself of all the stuff I don't know about the planet I actually live on. But the fact that they're orange mushrooms in the daylight, but then they glow green at night is really interesting. It would be neat if they reversed that. Like, maybe the mushrooms during the day would blend in more, because they seem to be wanting to do that in the biome and that have it be very low contrast and have stuff kind of blend together. So maybe the mushrooms are kind of like a pale green during the day, but they glow orange at night in Minecraft, because again, it would kind of fake you out for the creaking eyes. I think that'd be kind of a cool way to go. I think we've talked about that on the show before too. I do feel like, unfortunately, Mojang has described the Pale Garden as a variant of the roofed forest, like a variant of a dark oak forest. And I think that's one of the reasons why they look so similar. I hope they change their mind on that, because I, like Malcazar, I don't find it all that interesting. I also find it very strange when they're next to another, and that they seem to generate next to another because they are related in that way. It's a version of the dark oak forest. It looks very strange as you're flying around a Minecraft world. They look better when they're next to like a birch forest or even just a plains biome. Like, you just next to a dark oak, it feels very, very strange. It's got a very strange line down the middle of it. I like the other white stuff that they've added. The ghost plant is great. That would be a really fun little plant to decorate with. It would be cool to have it peppered around on the floor of the Pale Garden. It also doesn't seem like a huge ask, you know, like it doesn't seem like it would be. I mean, it's obviously everything that added to Minecraft involves work and testing and art and everything like that. But compared to other things that people have suggested in the biome, like structures and things like that, I think the ghost plant's a pretty straightforward thing to potentially add. I like the idea of the white pumpkins too. Um, I feel like in the email, and I did edit this a little bit for length. I'll include the full version in the show notes. Um, I think they mentioned that the pale white pumpkins could be smaller than regular pumpkins to
Mm,
have like a different size block for players to mess with. I think it could be even cool if they operated sort of like sea pickles, so that if you wanted to decorate with them later, then again, like
yeah.
the more that you could put down, like maybe one, it'd be like a small one in the center, kind of like a player head, and then like the more that you add to the block, then the more crowded they can get. That could be really cool, especially if they're not all the same pale. Like if one's a little bit orange, one's a little bit green, one's a little bit white. And if they're white and they're the size of a player head, that might work with the pale oak wood. You know, people put
Yeah.
kind of like banister heads and gate, like marking a gate for entering in a farm, or like there's to be some real potential to mix it in with some pale oak wood and have it actually work if it is the right color and the right, I guess, texture to match with that. In the same way that I've been using player heads as a data pack around the server, where I'll put a andesite player head on top of an andesite wall, and it looks like kind of like a proper end to the wall, kind of like a post head or some sort of carving or other embellishment on the fence. And so there's a lot of potential here, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you've already got people going wild over the notion of pale wood, pale oak wood being like more cottagecore vibes. Like, can you imagine how much those folks would enjoy having pumpkin variants as well and like more
Mm-hmm.
decorative stuff like that? Like, I can see that being really, really valuable. Even like you said, the ghost flowers, I do think those could be very easily something similar to nether sprouts when you get like the blue
100%.
grass that grows in like a warped forest biome and like crimson roots and stuff, like something similar to that but in an overworld biome as a grass variant. I think that's so like easy to do. Like you said, again, it does require work and like a few kind of trial and error kind of passes at it, but I do think it's a very easy way of adding a bit more character to it, and again, some foliage that players can take elsewhere and start to use in other biomes in a similar way to how you're going to be able to take pale moss and grow it from other trees and have it decorate other places. So yeah, I think there's some fun to be had there. I think maybe even if you want some of those flowers to be generated from the new pale moss instead of azalea saplings, there's potential for that to be added as a mechanic. I already mentioned before that I like the fact that pale moss is more efficient for moss mining, or like saves you inventory space because you're not getting the additional growth of azalea saplings in there. But I would be willing to compromise if it meant there was more like flora variety in the game at all. I think that'd be fun to see. So yeah, once again, I really want to thank Malcazar for a very detailed email, some fantastic suggestions, and we'll do our best to include all of the pictures that Malcazar sent in and other stuff that we've been able to source so that people can get an idea of what we're looking at here, because I think this is some really compelling stuff. For our main discussion, though, we wanted to return to the subject of difficulty and discuss whether Minecraft is getting easier, specifically Bedrock Edition Minecraft. In this most recent beta preview, it includes a change which puts Keep Inventory on by default in peaceful and easy difficulty. So we thought we want to discuss how we felt about changes like this and how else Minecraft's difficulty system could be made more dynamic. We're also going to include a link to the Minecraft wiki page about difficulty so that you can read through yourself, because you'd actually be quite surprised at how dynamic difficulty is already. But this also relates to an email we got this week from Tim S about changes to easy and peaceful mode, so I'll quickly read that to kick us off here. Hello, Pix and Joel. What are your thoughts on the Bedrock preview changes to easy and peaceful mode? I've played on a server before with Keep Inventory on, and it did help a lot with the frustration of dying, especially for children on the server. Personally, I did find the consequences of dying a bit too small, though creepers are still frustrating even when I don't lose my inventory. Perhaps an in-between solution would be better, something like a gravestone mod where you don't lose your items but they're placed in a temporary container where you died. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Tim exploded, but it doesn't seem like he died because Keep Inventory was on.
I like Tim's point that having Keep Inventory on made for less frustration for younger players. I think that's a
Yeah.
really good way to look at it. Like, it's the sacrifice that you're making where you might find it kind of easy, but you might be opening the door for a new player to really enjoy this game where they might be a little bit frustrated otherwise. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons like these settings exist. It's interesting that they're putting it on by default in Bedrock. I think that might be the point of contention where people might push back and say like, have the thing available, but like maybe don't have it on by default. I think that it's difficult unless that's very clearly communicated to the player. So like if you're clicking on easy mode when you create a world, they should list this is the feature of easy mode. Like these
Yeah.
are the things that you are agreeing to when you start easy mode. Because I think that's going to be good for young people to know. It's going to be good for adults to know if they're going in there and they're like, oh, like do I really want to do this? Because I think that it's worth knowing, and if it's clearly communicated, then I think that that's kind of the key there. On the Citadel, we actually play on hard, but I make the game harder for myself by not wearing a lot of netherite armor. I don't even wear diamond. Mostly that's just because I think it looks silly because of the blue, which I know I could retexture. But I have netherite boots only because the amount of times I jump off of stuff is just, I would go through boots like crazy if I didn't have a really sturdy set of boots. But I wear iron leggings, no chest plate, just elytra, and then a gold helmet, only because when I go to the nether, I don't want to be bothered by piglins. And so whenever I'm fighting stuff or I get into a situation, I very often have my butt handed to me. I was like, wait a minute, I'm not wearing hardly any armor and I'm playing on hard mode. So like, it's no wonder that I get a little frustrated sometimes when a couple of skeletons can give me a bad time. And so I think that there's also ways within the game, if you're playing on a server that does have keep inventory on and it's not in your control, then you could make the game more difficult for you, just by changing the way that you play the game. I think more options are better than less, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Just thinking about the signposting of keep inventory being a mechanic that's part of easy and peaceful mode on Bedrock Edition, I wanted to look up the difficulty settings for Terraria, because that's a game where difficulty is not necessarily tied to a world, it's tied to a character, and it depends heavily on what your character drops when they die. If you have like an easy character, then they don't drop any of their equipment or money. I think like classic characters drop their money but not their inventory, and like if you're playing on medium, they drop all of their items on death, and obviously on hardcore you drop all your items on death and you can't respawn. It's similar to Minecraft in that way. So yeah, there's a few different things like that, but when you load up a Terraria character, you get to choose, and it's very clear about like this is what happens. But I feel like on Terraria's difficulty settings, it's so focused on what happens to your character and less so on what happens in the world around you. There may be differences in like damage and whatnot, but it feels closer to what a sandbox game like Minecraft needs. Whereas I think a lot of the time when you change difficulty settings in other video games, it's really just about how much punishment enemies can take, how much damage they deal, and like maybe how scarce certain resources are. But with a game like Minecraft, it's really difficult to alter stuff like that and make it more interesting. My personal kind of like holy grail idea of how difficulty works is an improvement in AI, so that anything you do has to be more strategic, so that like, you know, a zombie can potentially follow you to places on hard where it couldn't follow you on easy. Like maybe they have the ability to climb ladders more effectively to get to the player, or jump to get to the player, or, you know, cross gaps or whatever it would happen to be. Obviously that goes against the way certain mobs behave right now and would probably break a lot of stuff when it comes to existing farms, but just like as an idea, I always feel like the best way of introducing a higher level of difficulty is making it more skillful for the player, and that doesn't necessarily just involve mashing attack more and like having drawn out combat where you can potentially get overwhelmed with just how long a combat goes on for. And that's typically what happens when an enemy is dealing more damage to you and is taking more damage in exchange. So I think Minecraft already does a pretty good job of making difficulty fairly dynamic in a system that has to allow so much player control. But I wanted to start by thinking about, like, when was the last time that you or I really played on peaceful or easy mode? Like, I've been playing on normal in Survival Guide. I typically switch to hard midway through a season of Survival Guide so we can have a discussion about difficulty and what that represents. But outside of Test Worlds, I don't think I've really played on peaceful or easy at all. Typically to avoid like mob spawns on a super flat world or something, just like an easy way of like disabling mob spawning is more or less the only reason I use peaceful mode. And how about you? I know you said you play on hard on the Citadel, but like, do you ever go into other worlds and play like a round of survival on easy mode, or does that just not occur to you?
I think the first server I played on with Steven was set to normal, only because I was new and he was not new, but like didn't feel like he was very good at it. So like he
Sure.
wanted a pleasant experience. I think his boys at the time were cool with playing on hard, but they were also teaching us how to play. So
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, like that was fine there. I have never played in peaceful and survival, and certainly I don't think have bothered with any easy modes. I normally default to normal in any video game I play. Like I tend not to
Yeah.
dial them back. I tend to try to see what was the developer, intending for normal is kind of what I want to experience. So I've never played on peaceful. Peaceful for me is appealing, but then I get cold feet on it because I think about the drawbacks of like not having access to Elytra and like not having access to certain resources like gunpowder, and you're just like, well if I don't have Elytra, why do I need gunpowder? Like there's a bunch of like kind of gut reaction survival Minecraft play that I kind of like, well I can't do the kind of farms that I want to make and necessarily have the kind of fun I want to have in setting up a new world on peaceful mode. It would be very much about the building, and I could see myself playing on a peaceful mod pack where there'd be a lot of other things to do. But I do feel like peaceful restricts a lot now. I think peaceful at the time when Minecraft added it was probably a little bit more of a utility. But now I feel like with all the stuff that they've added, that it's a bit of an ask for someone that has seen the other side and would want to go back to peaceful. So no, I don't have any real desire to play peaceful. I've thought about it as like an experiment, but like again, I don't think it'd be a very long-lived experience.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that it can be framed as a challenge because of resources being difficult or impossible to acquire without hostile mobs. So like, I'd wonder if any other game can really claim that their easiest difficulty mode is also a challenge mode, but in like a completely different way. So that's kind of fun. But yeah, like I haven't played on easy probably since I was learning the game, and even then I'm not actually certain I would have picked easy over normal, because like you, I just go in, sure, normal is the default. Like, that's the whole, the definition of the words, so might as well get the normal experience. But yeah, like, I think, even though we've had the discussion about difficulty before, most players with our level of experience, you and I both been playing Minecraft for a really long time, I think we're often looking for more challenge, so we haven't really talked about how to make the game easier and more approachable for people who might be intimidated by a level of activity, level of combat, or anything like that. But we do frequently hear from people who say, how do I get over the fear of going into a cave knowing that there's going to be monsters in there? I don't like the anticipation of being blown up by a creeper, and so I avoid certain types of activity. I just sleep through the day and live out my life on the surface. And I think the game has changed in some ways for people who prefer that playstyle, because think about the fact that now with terrain changes as of 1.18, iron is more accessible in mountains, so you don't have to go caving to get iron armor. And once you go caving, you can feel a lot more prepared as long as you've found a mountain with a significant iron deposit. I think that in itself, even though it's not necessarily part of a difficulty mode that iron spawns more frequently in certain types of terrain, it's just terrain generation, I think that's like effectively like something that makes the game more approachable. As long as you know that you can get iron from there, you have an easier time going into caves in early game, knowing that you can be fully equipped from the get-go. And I think in ways like that, Minecraft already does a really good job of making difficulty not just tied to the easy, normal, hardcore switch, but it affects things like statuses. Like, this is something that I find occurs to me most playing on... Actually, no, Minecraft Bingo is a game mode that I play on easy all the time, because all the items are accessible on whatever difficulty. The map defaults to easy, and I find that it's slightly better just for quality of life reasons, because you end up taking less damage, so if you're running around kind of vulnerable trying to beat your best time, you don't die as quickly or as easily. And also, cave spiders don't poison you is actually like a really nice change from dealing with cave spiders on hard mode and having to deal with poison and being swarmed by them. Because sometimes you'll run into an abandoned mineshaft and you're looking for cobwebs so you can break down string, because you need string to make a bow for a dispenser and you're crafting that for your bingo card or something like that. And I think there are occasional things where stuff like that pops up that can be really nice to have for a change compared to standard survival mode. I think long term, I'm still happy with there being gameplay balance in the form of more difficult features, but for occasional like trips into something like Minecraft Bingo, I think it's quite nice because you're effectively starting the new game over and over again when you're playing. Other stuff that changes about easy mode, the wither doesn't inflict wither effect, but interestingly enough, wither skeletons still do. I think that's kind of fun. Like, you can still get the wither effect, but you can't get it from the wither boss itself, just because I guess that fight is pretty hectic already and there's a lot going on. Pillager raid length is one of the other significant changes, where you have 3 waves of a raid on easy, 5 on normal, and then 7 on hard, and then an additional wave spawns once you have an additional layer of bad omen, I think. But then mob armor is the other one. Like, mobs don't spawn as frequently wearing armor, or at all wearing armor on easy, and less frequently on normal compared to hard. That is partly controlled by local difficulty. And interestingly enough, you can make the game easier for yourself if you don't stay in one place. Regardless of what difficulty you're playing on, local difficulty is based on the amount of time you've inhabited an area of the world. And so, right next to my starter house in my survival guide world, I must have spent more than 50 hours in that location. Local difficulty must be up the highest it possibly can be. But if you're living a more nomadic existence and you're exploring the world and you don't stay in one place for very long, you're actually playing a slightly easier experience because local difficulty doesn't have a chance to ramp up, generate more mobs with enchanted equipment and that kind of thing, and lead to you having a tougher experience as a result. And there are subtle things about Minecraft's difficulty like that I think go overlooked all the time, simply because Minecraft doesn't explain them directly to the player, and it's the kind of stuff that's been data mined and observed about Minecraft over the years and has been catalogued now on the Minecraft wiki for everybody to learn about.
I think the other thing that happens is gameplay that comes out of Minecraft difficulty. We've got a couple of players on the Citadel that really don't like going in the Nether because they find it intimidating or hard or difficult, or just it's not a pleasant experience. And if you don't have that, then you don't have the design of nether tunnels and nether networks, which is a pretty normal thing on a lot of servers.
Yeah.
It does a number of things. Like, it protects everyone from being annoyed by ghasts and other mobs if you just find them annoying, or protects you from them if you find them troubling and a problem and you don't want to die and you're not good at it, older or younger players that don't have the mobility in a video game, like all kinds of reasons why that might be not a great experience that keep people from experiencing the Nether. Again, a biome now that has a lot going for it since the Nether update, and continues to have stuff in it that is worth going to get, right? That people that build might want to go and collect for their buildings in the overworld, but they don't go because it's too intimidating. And without the difficult, experience of going to the Nether, you don't have nether tunnels and nether networks and stuff. And then that becomes an entire build project. Like that, yeah. They can be a simple tunnel. You can make it at a nether rack and have it be a boring box, or you can decorate them and create hubs and portal networks. Like, there's this whole expansive game that opens up to you when you are using the Nether in that way. We have to create our own little bubble. If we're going to be in this bubble a lot, we might as well make it look pretty. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that just wouldn't maybe not exist as much if it was something as like make Nether easy, or like player doesn't take fire damage from ghasts, check mark. And I think that would be almost too granular, in terms of the control that you might give the player. I do like the idea of having additional settings, and I know that depending on the type of game, I have experienced recently in Satisfactory that with not the 1.0 release, but I think the update 8 before they came out with the final release was a change to controlling the behavior of the megafauna, the animals on the planet that you're on. Mm-hmm. And you can have them on passive, which is just like peaceful mode. They will do nothing. Retaliation, which means that if you attack them, they will attack back. And then aggressive, which means they look at you like food. And it's been a much more pleasant experience. This could be because I'm a content creator, to go around into dangerous caves with spiders in them, with dealing with these giant spitters that have like fireballs that they shoot at you around precious resources. And when you just want to go collect the thing so you can build the next thing and move on, and you don't die to a spider the size of a giraffe in a cave, and you're just like, that was an experience I didn't need. Now I need to go get my stuff. And it's just, it's a setback. It's a time sink that I didn't enjoy about the game. And it's a weird experience having switched to Retaliation to walk into a cave with a bunch of creepy crawlers and having them completely ignore me. Now, if I screw up and I hit one of them by accident, then it's on. And there are parts of the game where that require you to research different remains from animals around. So you do have to engage if you want to go down that tech road. So it doesn't mean that I'm always safe. It means that I have to make a choice. But I do find that I think of Satisfactory as a building game first and a survival game very, very much second.
Mm-hmm.
And so changing that really helps. It's the same thing. They have keep inventory. They also have keep everything, or just keep what's on your person. So like your boots, your jetpack, your gas mask, like all the things that you're wearing as gear for progression, you would keep, similar to like if you kept your armor in Minecraft, but not the blocks that you're carrying.
Yeah, right.
So you have a choice there. And that helps. The only way that you would lose everything, similar to the end in Minecraft, is if you fell off an edge of the end and you die, you lose everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same in Satisfactory. The map has an edge. There's a couple of places that are like the abyss or the ocean, I guess. And if you fall in there, you're not getting your stuff back. If you die on a field, it's a little box with all of your stuff in it by default. And so you can go back and get your stuff, but like, how long is the corpse run? Like, that reminds me of my days in World of Warcraft, where like if you died, the punishment was this long walk back to wherever you died to get your stuff. And that goes back to, I think, something that Tim mentioned in the email, which was that, having a gravestone, like a gravestone mod where you died, you can keep your inventory, but there's a cost to go get it and have that be a balance, for players. And I don't know whether Minecraft would ever add that. I feel like certainly having options to alleviate player frustration, because even as someone that's played this game for a very long time, the odd time that I've died, I think maybe like fighting the Ender Dragon or in lava probably would be the more frequent situation. Like you're building some cool thing in the nether underneath a lava lake, and you mine the wrong block above you and you just can't get out of the lava fast enough. And then 2/3 of your items, including the important stuff, get burned up and you can't get them back. Like, I don't find that fun. I find that now, instead of enjoying building the rest of my stream, I have to grab what I can and salvage the stream, and then either spend time on stream or off stream getting geared back up again, which I've already done a couple times before. I don't find it exploratory or interesting. I just find it monotonous and kind of tedious. So having a gravestone mod for something like that, where you just like, if you were dumb enough to die in lava, then there really is no consequences. And I think that's the biggest problem I have with games that are really hard, is that I find them repetitive. And for me, it breaks the illusion and reminds me, or makes me feel like I'm wasting time in a video game. Whereas I can spend 3 hours building something cool in Minecraft, and I do not feel like that is time well wasted.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that is time spent doing something creative and fun and expressing myself. And I don't find that it makes me feel like I'm playing a video game. Whereas the difficulty in other games, and other survival games especially, where you have to repeat the process or start at the beginning, like I'm so done. After the third time I die, I'm just like, this is not a loop that I'm interested in repeating.
Yeah, makes sense. I kind of wonder if there's a certain amount of this that I think is also tied into item loss and the despawn timer, right? Because like universally in Minecraft, items despawn after 5 minutes just resting on the ground as an item entity. And I wonder if whether it's done through a gravestone preserving your inventory for as long as it takes you to get back there, or if there could be some sense of separation between items, maybe like the overflow produced by like a farm, if there are just items sat there. That's the reason that you don't want to have items permanently loaded into the world and not despawning, because potentially enough buildup of entities can cause technical issues. But if a player inventory could have persistent items when it was dropped, so that you could, however long it took, go back and get those, that I think could be a really interesting way of making a more dynamic difficulty change between easy, normal, hard, that could still result in the same thing. Your inventory gets scattered everywhere, you have to go get it again. But on normal, maybe it takes longer for those items to despawn. If they're like tagged as items that were in the player's inventory, as long as you go and pick them up within, say, 10 minutes or 15 or something like that, you have a longer threshold. Like, that feels like it would be more kind to the player compared to if you're playing on hard. Sure, you get a 5-minute despawn timer just like every other item. It depends like how intuitive that feels to the player when observing the behavior of other items, and then also does that apply to items that the player drops willingly out of their inventory versus items that get scattered when you die, right? So I think maybe there's some give and take to happen there, but it could be something that they revise in future. I'm also one of the things that fascinates me about this discussion, and it's come up already naturally, is that what video games in general, consider difficulty is almost always related to enemy behavior and combat scenarios, right? Like if it's not a strategy game or like, a chess simulator or something along those lines where you're playing against an opponent and it feels very kind of like evenly matched, it's a lot more kind of skill-based and reactive the way Minecraft gameplay is. It's a lot about like how much damage enemies do, whether they do that damage to you more effectively, more frequently, and so forth. And a lot of the difficulty settings are just those behaviors. I'm really curious, given Minecraft's nature as a game that contains all sorts of other mechanical stuff people can do, are there any non-combat related mechanics which can be made easier? And I think the question becomes a lot more difficult, because if you consider like resource acquisition being easier, say that you automatically had like a couple of levels of fortune, and on easy mode you're getting more iron from nodes and more kind of coal from coal ore and more diamonds from diamonds. At that point, everybody just goes, well, if I can get more diamonds that way, I guess we're putting the server on easy instead of hard, because what people want is to build up wealth in this game. Like, you want to reach a post-scarcity point where you have more freedom to build anything. And that leads to a lot more people playing on easy just because they don't care necessarily about the combat challenge. They want to be able to build stuff. And then I would be curious if that led to a culture of players playing easy, and then easy still becoming like a dirty word because you're not putting in the effort to get like fortune enchantments and stuff, or fortune enchantments give you even more, and so it's just about like greed at that point. And it's really difficult to imagine a system in which Minecraft can change much about the world that isn't related to how you interact with other entities and combat and hostility, but still make it a dynamic difficulty system that changes when you're playing on easy versus on hard. I think even stuff like villager zombification, where it happens 100% of the time on hard and doesn't happen at all on easy, we've talked about how those almost seem flip-flopped, in the sense of on easy mode, if you want to get more discounts, there's no way of getting them from villager zombification because your villager dies every time you have to cure an existing zombie villager, which feels harder than doing it on hard. But the notion there is that on hard, if you're working with a natural village and a zombie raid happens and they all get converted, suddenly they all become enemies, and it's more about them wanting to fight you. And it becomes a task of preserving those in order to make sure that they can be cured. It doesn't work that way with trading halls, which is how people typically use villagers in the kind of survival game that we play. But I'm just kind of curious if there's anything that really feels like it can be subverted from the easy, normal, hard, like, separation, and have it be still related to mechanics that you and I prefer to interact with, like building and redstone.
I know that we have this server on hard because of the drops, like because of the consistency of mob behavior. So zombie reinforcements being a really good example. Like that mechanic for copper farms, you can only do it on hard mode.
Or up until recently, I think they did change it so that other difficulties have reinforcement zombies now. And people in chat can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly certain that was the case as of a really recent changelog.
Sure. I mean, when we set up the server, like we needed to be on hard for a certain amount of drops. And so that was the motivation. Like, it goes back to your idea of greed. Like, we wanted more drops from our mob farms and more consistent behavior. It also helped that a lot of the tutorials that you're looking up are usually based on hard mode. When you're looking up YouTube tutorials for redstone farms and whatnot. So that was one of the reasons why we went that way. So there was the same motivation. It was just a different difficulty setting. Rather than easy, we went hard. And yeah, like I'm trying to think about a way that the game could be easier outside of mob difficulty. I was thinking about your point about the despawn and those timers, and that's something like a gravestone mod could potentially communicate to the player if it was something that showed up just like the UI on a beacon or a status effect that you get from something else in the world, like a potion effect. They give you a timer. They say your fire resist potion has got 8 minutes and counting down. Your gravestone could have 10, 15 minutes before it despawns, and give you an indication, hey, you got to get to that grave before the 15 minutes is up. I don't know how you communicate the 5-minute despawn timer to a player. I think that's just one of those data mined community communicated things that has been in the game for a while. But a gravestone could be a UI interaction that would let you do that. They could also show you it on the screen or on the map. They do that on Satisfactory. They give you an indication on the HUD where your little chest is, not like vertically, but certainly on the X, and on Satisfactory, it's the XZ axis. So like, left and right, the 4 cardinal directions, you'll get like at least a bearing on where you need to go. And that I find very helpful when it's happened. The other thing about an inventory thing that I was thinking of is maybe there's a cost to it. And maybe the more that you die, either the more expensive or the more varied the items get. Like if the first time you die, in order to get your items back, you have to sacrifice an iron ingot to the gravestone to get them all back. That means you got to do a little bit of digging. You got to do a little bit of gameplay before you get your items back. What if the 10th time you die, it's a piece of endstone? Like, have you even gone to the end yet? Like, who knows, right? So there could be ways of adding that in there to try and make it more of a cost for players, and maybe that's more of a modded thing for players to consider if they're on a mixed server where people want different difficulty levels, and just kind of add those options in for people if they want to use them. But yeah, I think that it's difficult when you get into a game that can have a player base that is so focused on the most efficient way to do something. Because the moment that you shorten the road between point A and B, that's the road that most people take.
Yeah.
And so it becomes harder, pardon the play on words, to implement difficulty.
Yeah.
when you've got those kind of player behavior predictions, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah, changing difficulty is difficult, is the lesson we're taking away from this. And honestly, you know what the pay to return your items and stuff sounds like to me? Minecraft SOS, which is kind of a system we had. It was reviving the player entirely, but the gravestones mod paying and it getting more expensive the longer you did it, that was kind of the whole point of that server. So ideas like that are out there, and obviously the player base has had a lot of different ideas over the years about how to change things up and keep things interesting. So who knows? We'll see what Mojang's experiments end up looking like, because they were talking about there being more than just this as a potential change to rebalancing difficulty in this game, and we'll see what they have in mind. For now, though, that's where we're going to leave this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me. The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can do that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks, where pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every week. We also have monthly hangouts, quarterly hangouts, and a bunch of other patrons-only events, so you'll get access to all of those as well. We currently have 305 patrons, which is up one from last week. And as always, a special thanks go to our content engineer patrons. That's Gundar H. Striker, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. New episodes are available on Mondays on all of your favorite podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked at thespawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where we're back in Survival Guide there. Chopping Tuesdays are back in action as well. Looking forward to chopping some wood and chatting with everybody over there. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online, as always, is at joelduggan.com. That includes a link to the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. Jonny joined me this past Saturday. We talked for a couple hours about the season finale, season 2 of Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. We had a lot to say about that. It was a really fun episode, and that is going to be in the hopper for editing and then out soon. I'm Joel Duggan on Twitch, very easy to find, and currently streaming a lot of Satisfactory, but looking into getting some more Minecraft technical play on the go as well. I stream almost daily at 1 o'clock Atlantic here in Nova Scotia, so look up the time difference and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and you get more slimes on a full moon.